Can you hear me all right?
Yes, can hear you great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. Hello. Uh-oh. I think you might be muted.
How are you?
How are you this morning?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I was just trying to figure out all this good technology stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see. I'm gonna pull up my screen and just do a brief introduction, and then I'll turn it over to you all. Okay? Does that sound?
Sounds
great. Okay, let me just get this. It's always fun to navigate Zoom, right? Oh my goodness. Oh, absolutely. Okay. Now I got the right place. Let's see. Okay. All right. Okay, so I want to welcome everyone today, and we are going to be listening to Rebecca and Nicole this morning share a presentation on healthy relationships. But first off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jacqueline Salabai. I'm with Native Americans for Community Action, working with the Native Connections program. And a little bit about Native Connections. We are focused on youth-guided programming, working with youth in the community to create some youth-guided programming, events, education material, social marketing items, and working with other organizations and agencies in the area to look at youth services. So that's just a little bit of an overview of Native Connections program, and we invite you today to listen to Rebecca and Nicole, and we really appreciate that they're here today to provide this presentation. So again, if you have any questions or would like more information, that will be available by contacting NACA or going to our website at www.nacainc.org. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca and Nicole to provide our presentation today. All right.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and get our screen set up so that we can share our presentation. I appreciate you bearing with us. All right, and let's put that in full view. Okay, so like Jacqueline said, we are Rebecca and Nicole. We are going to be talking a bit about healthy relationships, just the basics today. And we are both from Northland Family Help Center. We will introduce ourselves a little more fully in just a moment, but we're going to dive right in and get started with all the good stuff that we have today. Just to give everyone an idea of what we'll be talking about in our presentation, we have outlined the full session along with our objectives. So we'll start off with some group agreements just to kind of help show what we share with our youth when we are out in the community. Like I said, we'll introduce ourselves, a little bit of background to our curriculum, and then we'll dive in talking about what we want in a dating partner, kind of thinking around those things, and we'll transition into talking about how harm can show up in a relationship, right? So we're talking about healthy relationships, and we also want to identify some of the ways that harm can show up. And then we will be wrapping up with some support of maybe how to help a friend or help a loved one, along with some connection to some community resources. So let's go ahead And we're going to just look at the group agreements. I know that we are recorded, so this will be a bit of an overview. But when we speak with youth or in schools, one of our big ones is what's said here stays here and what's learned here leaves here. We really like to focus on creating safety in the spaces that we're teaching in and sharing with. So with this, we ask youth if personal stuff is shared, we want to keep it in this space. But anything Rebecca and I share, please feel free to take it into the world. The next two really center around openness and respect. We all are coming from different spaces in our life, and sometimes, and it certainly has happened, where youth disagree with what we might be sharing, or you might have some different thoughts about that, and that is totally okay. This is to help, again, right, create that safety and respect, and kind of try to attempt to like process a little bit of maybe what's going on before we react, so to speak. And then these last two, certainly very important, and especially in a recorded space. We always encourage to take care of yourself. Sometimes this content can bring up different responses in folks. It might be challenging. So we always encourage, if you need to step away or even connect with your support system if something is brought up, completely encouraging that. And our last one is, you don't have to share if you don't want to. We are very discussion based. We love interactive activities. We always like to share this so that folks don't feel like they have to share something personal, because that can just be, really difficult. Again, right, creating that safety around this topic. So that is a high level overview of our group agreements. But I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Rebecca to go a little more in depth with our introduction.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. Alrighty. So we also want to provide you a little bit of information about what Northland Family Help Center does as an entirety in the community of Northern Arizona and Flagstaff. So we are a community organization in Flagstaff, Arizona, and we have a few different kind of parts to our organization. So the first part is our youth shelter, which is for youth under the age of 18. We also have a domestic violence shelter, which is gender inclusive and for anyone who's actively fleeing relationship violence. We have legal advocacy, which can help folks navigate the legal system, civil cases, anything that's kind of with the courts. We have free counseling, which is available to youths. So that is definitely one of our more well-known resources. We have Flagstaff Initiative Against Trafficking, which addresses human trafficking in the Flagstaff area. And then finally, we have community education, which is Nicole and I. And our whole thing is that we work to prevent relationship violence. And one of the things that we do is we teach safe dates in the community. So this actually leads really well into our next slide, which just gives us a brief background on what Safe Dates is. So for the entirety of today, we're going to be pulling different pieces from our Safe Dates sessions, right? You're going to get little snippets from all 10 of the sessions. All of the information in this presentation is from the Safe Dates 3rd edition curriculum, which we typically present in community organizations and schools. A lot of times we're very school-based. So brief overview of what Safe Dates is so you know our direction going forward. Safe Dates is a program geared towards relationship violence prevention. Over the course of usually 5 or 10 sessions, we discuss how you want to be treated by a dating partner, how to tell if you or your friend is in an unhealthy relationship, how to help your friend who's in a harmful dating relationship, how to connect with them with resources, how to just connect with them during conversation, how to handle feelings like anger and jealousy. Those are normal human emotions that come up in a relationship, and how do we handle that in a way that feels safe and cultivates the relationship. And then finally, how to communicate with those around you. So we really want to work on building healthy relationships from a very young age. We can teach this with middle schoolers because we know even in middle school, kids are starting to interact with each other and starting to get interested in dating. And going forward, we always say this in all of our sessions because sometimes we have students or teens say to us, well, what if I'm not dating? What if I'm not interested in dating? And to that we say, that's okay. A lot of this stuff is applicable to to any type of relationship, not just a dating relationship. So it really is helpful across the board. And we also say, you might not be dating, you might not be interested in ever dating, and that's okay. But you might have a friend who might need this information someday, and you're going to be the person who can connect with them on that. So we are going to dive right into the bulk of our presentation, and Nicole is going to take it away.
Let me get myself unmuted here. Yeah, so we're going to dive right in, starting with this big question. This is one of my favorite questions that we ask, because we're really starting to get our minds in gear as to, whoops, let's go back. We're not quite there yet. But we're looking at how do we define dating? Like, what actually is dating? So if you're viewing this, wanting you to kind of mush that around in your head for a moment of like, how would I actually define this? So this we see also with youth and teens can be really hard, and even with adults, we're like, well, what does this actually mean? So one way that we can think about this is in terms of progression, right? So progression not only from like, I'm interested in this person, to maybe commitment or labels or however it looks when you're like, we're established, we're a thing, right? And also naming too, when we talk about this and we think about that progression, like that point A to maybe point B, naming, right, that how we've described things or explained them throughout generations probably looks a little different, but there are certainly similarities, right? Like I know when I was younger, it was like, oh, are you going steady? Some of you today are like, are y'all talking? You know, what's that situation? So asking this and thinking about this really helps us build that awareness of like, oh, what is this? And maybe might even highlight, what are some of the things that I value in the dating process? For some teens, it might be, well, am I in your social media bio? Am I visible in that realm, right? That's something that is certainly very prevalent today and might have not been in earlier years, as we see tech become very, continue to be very prevalent. It might be, well, what about traditional dates, right? Like going to the movies or going out to dinner, that can certainly be encompassed in this, right? So this is really our first starting off point of just thinking about what is in this. And it might be that we all have a little bit of a different definition, and that's okay. That is so totally okay. Right? So we're getting that brain jogged, and that is going to kind of lead us into this next space. Once we kind of have connection with our definition, and we're like, okay, I have some ideas around this, right? The process, so to speak. We're going to kind of look at shifting to focusing on the person, right? Maybe the person we're interested, or if we're not dating or wherever you're at, right? Thinking of like, what do I want in a dating partner? What traits or what characteristics do I really want in a person, that I want to share with them? Now, you'll see below, we have our little mentee time. So typically when we've run this activity in schools, when we've been in person, we've been able to do dating bingo, which is super fun. Everyone writes out the characteristics that they want, and they try to find someone who has that matching characteristic. And to adapt to COVID and maintaining safety and social distancing, we did transition to this online platform of Menti. So we do have some screen captures of it, so you're not just trying to visualize what this looks like. But we have folks go to menti.com, we give them a code, and then we ask them to enter the top 3 things that they would like in a dating partner. And it does create this really beautiful word cloud. And when more than one person answers, so for example, maybe like, I want them to be funny. So if multiple people enter funny will grow bigger in the world, in the word cloud. And it's a really wonderful way to see, and it's anonymous too. So peers can kind of see like, oh, these are, the things that are maybe, right, the words are growing. These are important around my classmates. And then also it can be a thing that maybe can spark something for someone who's like, oh, I didn't think of that trait. Or I didn't think of that characteristic. And I actually do really value that. So for those who are watching, wanting to like take that pause for even just a second and think about, what are the important traits and characteristics that you really want in a dating partner or a friend if you're not dating. That could be, like I said, right? Like funny, maybe they're athletic or loyal. We've certainly had some responses like, I want them to be rich, and we always, call that in, bring that in, because that might be something that someone really wants. It's a non-judgmental space, because all have our things that we desire. So even just thinking about like, what for me is important, what for me is really important in this space. And what I'll do, give you a second to kind of think about that. Okay, I'm going to transition us over to our word cloud just so you can see what some of the previous responses have been. So right, we see the question right at the top here. And if you're having trouble seeing the words, I'll read out some of them. So we see supportive, really big. So that was one that multiple students, multiple people answered. We have outgoing, good personality, loves their family. Maybe that like family connection is super duper important. Caring, cute, trustworthy, genuine, hilarious, right? Maybe funny doesn't cut it. We need to get to the hilarious level. That's okay. Okay looking, loves me for me, right? Maybe that acceptance piece is so important, right? So we're seeing this show up in many different ways, right? But I see these connecting pieces around trustworthiness, loyalty, support and caring, right? So like really enveloping us into that space. So, right, we've defined our definition of dating. We've kind of looked at what we really want in a dating partner in terms of who they are. And where we transition next is to how do you want to be treated by a dating partner? So with this question, sometimes we often don't think about this, right? We'll be like, well, I want someone who, we think about this traits and characteristics, but we often don't immediately go to thinking of, oh, how do I want to be treated, right? And this can be a really great question to really just get us thinking about that, right? Because if they're funny and they're kind and loyal, that may not translate to how they communicate or treat us. So this is also setting us up too to begin to think about how harm can show up in a relationship. And we're not quite there yet. We will transition to that shortly. And we also use Menti for this as well. So we erase the board and we encourage folks to go in and say, hey, like what are 3 ways that you want to be treated? So if they're funny, do you want them to joke with you? If they're loyal, what does loyal look like? Is that they respect your time, they respect your space? So this one can certainly be a little bit more challenging because we're kind of trying to shift that view just ever so slightly. So for those viewing, right, taking that moment to think about how do you want to be treated? How do you want this person that you've just, visualized, how do they treat you, in that dating space or in a friendship? So just taking a second with that. And then I'll transition us into our second word cloud. So, right, how do you want to be treated? We see respected, super big. Multiple people answered that. Right, that's a pretty big one. We often want to be respected in our relationships. It's really hard to be in a space in a relationship where we feel disrespected. We also see, right, be there for me, loved. Maybe they challenge me. I'm trying to read wifey material. Feel loved, really special, maybe a friend and a lover. So maybe highlighting, right, like maintaining friendship in a romantic space is super important to me. I want to be treated not only romantically, but like, hey, we're still friends, right? We still have friendship, right? Romanced, maybe that's big. You're like, hey, I'm big on going on dates and these different displays, right? So this certainly, right, isn't all inclusive. But this is a way to kind of shift our perspective into thinking about how how we want to be treated, right? And so from here, what we're going to do, just to give you all a heads up, is we are going to transition into talking about how harm can show up in a relationship. And we're going to look at it through 3 different types of harm. So we're going to look first at physical harm, then we'll look at emotional harm, and lastly, harm caused through technology. So with these pieces, just wanting to let you know that we are going to have the lists of harm displayed on the screen. So just wanting to give you that warning if that is something that you just need space from, just so you're prepared to kind of see those pieces. And Rebecca will be taking us through that piece. And I do want to pause if there's anything, Rebecca, that you'd like to add if I missed anything.
No, I think that was great. And that is a great transition. So we've really defined dating. We've talked about what we want in a dating partner and how we want to be treated. And the reality of the world we live in, and the reality of why Nicole and I are here and doing the jobs that we're doing, is that not everyone is treated respectfully and with love and with trust and loyalty in a relationship. And so that's why we are transitioning now into talking about those types of harm that also can show up in a relationship. And that is going to be on the next slide. So we're starting with physical harm. We always say when we're talking to teens that physical harm is what you think of automatically when you think of an abusive relationship, right? You think of bruises, you think of hitting, scratching, and that's not the only type of harm, right? So we're going to keep going into that. I'm not going to go over every single one of these on the list because it is a lot of information. So what I'm just going to do is talk about a few of them, talk about a few really important aspects of physical harm, and just know that at the end of the presentation, we'll leave our contact information. So if you have any questions or concerns on anything we've talked about, you can definitely reach out to us. So like I said, physical harm is often what we think of when we think of an abusive relationship. We know that there are other types of harm, but this is kind of like the basic thing that we're thinking of. So again, hitting, scratching, pushing, we have those things that when we ask students, like, what do you think physical harm is, they think of right away. There's not even a pause usually. But a few of the other really important ones on this list that I just want to touch base on a little bit more closely is keeping a dating partner from leaving. So this can be physically keeping someone from leaving, like a room or a home, or it can be using threats to keep someone from leaving, right? Or threats of someone's physical safety to keep someone from leaving as well. We also see damaging personal property. And with this, we sometimes get questions around, well, if my partner throws my phone on the ground, they're not hurting me, they're just hurting my phone. But we can also see that that is a way of kind of maintaining control, right? A phone is a device that we use for communication. And what does that mean when we don't have access to that device anymore? And then what does it mean just in general if our partners feel the need to break our things, right? What are they trying to convey by that act? So also acting in an intimidating way, right? So that isn't always a physical, like something with touch, but it is something that can create a concern around physical safety. So the really important thing about physical harm is that there's this aspect of power and control. I once had a student ask me, well, my partner pinched me on St. Patrick's Day. Is that abuse? And to that, we always talk about, and it was because the person hadn't been wearing green. So of course they got a pinch on St. Patrick's Day because they weren't wearing green. And to that, we kind of talked about this aspect of power and control of like, well, was that partner trying to control you? Were they trying to keep power over you? Or was it just part of this funny tradition that we have of pinching people who don't wear green? And then with that, we always give the example of, we have a scenario that's a girlfriend pinches her boyfriend because he's looking at another girl. The other girl's just walking by and she pinches him because she doesn't like that he's looking at another girl. So in that scenario, we see the power and control, right? And we see that that's a different dynamic than pinching on St. Patrick's Day, right? So this concept of power and control is going to continue throughout the different types of harm, but it's especially important to look at with physical harm, right? Because we don't always see bruises or scratches as a result of physical harm. But that physical harm, even if it's not leaving a mark, is still physical harm, right? We still say that that is considered physical harm. Even if there's not a mark, right? If there's power and control, if that aspect has become a part of it, then we consider that physical harm. So we are going to move into emotional harm, which often when we ask students, what do you think emotional harm is? We get kind of crickets because it's something newer that we're starting to talk about in this field, right? Of this concept of emotional harm, and that this is considered abusive behavior, right? A lot of times we hear from people like, oh, well, just ignore it. They're not physically hurting you. But what Nicole and I always say in classrooms is emotional harm can be just as dangerous as physical harm. And emotional harm can sometimes transition into physical harm, right? They can all be kind of interrelated. So again, there's so much information on this list. We're not going to go over every single one, although we know how important it is to know each of these. So again, if you need to pause it and just take a look at the screen, feel free. But I'm just going to read through a few, alrighty? So the ones that we talk about really in depth with teens, the first one is isolating a dating partner from others. So we always give this definition of isolation as kind of removing people from their support system. And this doesn't happen in an obvious way. Sometimes it happens slowly, sometimes it happens kind of under the radar, but essentially a person loses access to their friends and family through the behavior of their dating partner, right? So their dating partner might say something like, you know, I really just don't trust your sibling, right? I don't trust your sibling. I don't think you should be hanging out with them as much. You should just be with me, right? You trust me, so hang out with me. So it's going to happen slowly. It's not always going to be super obvious, but isolation is one of those huge tools that's used by harm doers or perpetrators. The next one that we talk about is jealousy and behaving jealously in a relationship. So when we talk about this with teens, we always ask, who here has felt jealous before? Almost everyone raises their hand because jealousy is a really normal human emotion, just like happiness, anger, sadness, we all feel it. The difference again is when power and control comes into play, right? And we talk about isolation and jealousy really close and in terms of each other because jealousy can be used to isolate sometimes. So it could be like, you know, I really don't like that you're hanging out with that friend. I don't trust you around that friend. And I just don't think you should be around them, right? So maybe using jealousy to control the partner's behavior, the partner's plans, or even relationships with other people. So again, jealousy is a normal human emotion, and there is that line that can be crossed where it becomes a tool of power and control, right? So we always have to be really careful about what our emotions are kind of creating in our thought process, right? Because it's really important to acknowledge these emotions, and it's really important to keep our emotions in a safe place for our partner and the people around us. You'll see threatening to hurt a dating partner on here as well. I believe that showed up on the physical side. Just know that it can be an emotionally draining threat, right? It doesn't have to be a threat to someone's physical body. It can be a threat to just their safety, right? And that can start to wear down on a person. We talk about threatening to hurt oneself. So this one is really important, especially when we're talking with teens, because something that we see quite often is maybe in a partner, someone says, I'm going to break up with you. The other person says, if you break up with me, I'm going to hurt myself, right? And we see this show up in many, many different ways. The important thing about this is it's always important to take this to an adult, right? We want to take that threat, we want to take that statement seriously. We never want to say like, oh, they're just being dramatic, or oh, we know that they're not being truthful, right? Or they're just doing this for attention. We never want to believe that, right? Because on the off chance that something does happen, we want to make sure we've done everything possible to keep that person safe. And that means for someone under the age of 18, we're taking it to a trusted adult, right? A teacher, a family member, just someone that you trust, right? Someone that knows what to do with that information and can help keep that person safe. But the other really important thing about this is It's never the victim's fault if the perpetrator does decide to hurt themselves, right? So we always try to say to someone like, this is a really hard situation and it's never your fault, right? You're not in charge of keeping them safe. They're the ones who ultimately have to make their decision. So what we do say is we take this seriously. We want this to be taken to an adult, and it's not the victim's fault, right? So that's a really important one that we often get a lot of questions on. All right, I think I'm going to talk about one more on this emotional harm list, which is displaying inappropriate anger. So again, anger is like jealousy. It's a normal human emotion. We all feel it, but there's a difference between appropriate and inappropriate anger. Inappropriate anger is used for power and control. All right, so inappropriate anger would look like punching walls, punching someone, screaming, right? Maybe stonewalling, which is just kind of like closing off, right? Not being a part of the conversation anymore and not communicating that the conversation needs to pause. Appropriate anger looks like talking it out, maybe taking a second, saying, hey, I need to pause. I'm feeling really frustrated. I need to take a second, right? So there's a difference between inappropriate and appropriate anger, and inappropriate anger can be a form of emotional harm. So we're going to transition right into harm caused through technology, which this is where teens shine, right? This is where you know everything and you're teaching us. A lot of the stuff on this list we have gathered from working with teens for years. So this is a huge one. I encourage you to find information on it if you're interested in how this shows up in relationships. We're not going to go into super depth, but there's a lot of information out there on it. So demanding passwords to a partner's phone and social media account. Everyone has the right to privacy in their social media and their phone. And sometimes we get teens who say like, well, my partner just wants to make sure I'm being loyal. And to that, we always say, you know, where's this feeling coming from? Like where is this worry about disloyalty coming from? So we always worry about, or we always ask questions, right? We're never going to say like, that's bad, break up. But we are going to say, where's this coming from? How does it make you feel? What would be the ultimate like best case scenario to come out of this? So again, a few more: incessantly texting and expecting immediate responses to text calls and other messages. I don't know about you all, but I am not always on my phone. I do not always text back right away. So it's not a realistic expectation to have of someone. And then the other one we talk about is threatening to expose a partner's intimate photos or secrets if they don't comply with any demands, right? They don't have to just be sexual demands. It can be any demands at all. So we all have the right to privacy, and technology is one of those new things that we're all learning so much about, and we can really learn a lot from asking teens how this shows up in their day-to-day. So I know that was so much information. We went through the 3 types of harm, and we really wanted to end on this kind of concept of, okay, we know the harm, we can see it, but what do we do with that? What happens if a friend comes to us and says, hey, I think I'm in a harmful relationship. I think I'm in an abusive relationship. What happens, right? Like, what do we do? So this next little section is what we do. It's how we address harm. And this is from the perspective of a teen, right? So we know you all teens are not therapists, right? You're not advocates, and you have this really amazing set of skills on how to connect with your friends and your peers. And so this friends wheel is built with that in mind, right? This friends wheel does not expect you to be a therapist, but what this friends wheel does is it draws on your strengths that you already have as a friend, right? As a person who's connected with that person who's coming to you and saying, hey, I'm in a harmful relationship. So the first thing that we're going to do if someone comes to us and says they're in a harmful relationship, or you see some red flags, right? They're coming up and you're worried about that friend. The first thing we're going to do is we're not going to gossip, right? You're going to talk in private. You don't want to tell people without your friend's permission. Now, the caveat to this is if you feel like you need to tell a trusted adult, you can tell a trusted adult, right? That's not gossiping. That's something different. That's making sure that there's safety in the situation. But we're not going to tell our other peers. We're not going to chat about this when we don't have to, right? The next thing you're going to do is you're going to believe the story. So we want you to listen and believe your friend, acknowledge their feelings, and let your friend know that they are not alone. And the purpose of this is that we're starting to break down victim blaming. And in our other sessions, we really break down what victim blaming is. But for this purpose, we're just going to say, I believe you, right? The third thing we're going to do is we're going to tell the person that they do not deserve to be abused. The perpetrated abuse is not your friend's fault. No one deserves to be abused, right? So sometimes it can happen where your friend might start to say like, I did this and it really made them mad and that's why they did this to me, right? But there's no reason, there's no excuse for abuse. And so we want to start by just saying two simple sentences. I believe you and you did not deserve this, right? It's a really hard conversation, but in theory, we can start by saying those two really simple things. The fourth thing that we're going to do is we're going to let your friend make their own decisions. So you're going to respect your friend's right to make a decision when they are ready. Each of us are the experts in our own lives. And this can feel really difficult, but this can show up by just saying, you know what you need to do. How can I support you, right? Not saying, well, you just need to leave that person, or why aren't you out already? Like, why aren't you getting out of this situation? But by saying, I support you. How can I help you? All right. So the fifth thing that we're going to do is make a safety plan. Now for teens, this can feel kind of daunting, right? They're like, do I need to write out a safety plan? I don't even have a form for it. But you don't have to worry about that. It's not a form. It's not a written document. It can be, but it's not always. A safety plan is just talking through with your friend on how to keep them safe, right? What have they done in the past to keep themselves safe? What are they going to do in the future? Do they have access to phone numbers if their phone is broken? Do they have a place to go if they're feeling unsafe? So you're going to make a safety plan, which just means talking through aspects of safety with your friend. And then finally on the friends wheel, we're going to give help. So we're going to know the resources in your school and community. Is there a hotline? What legal, medical, or counseling options are available? So with this one, we're going to move to the next slide, which is our community resources page. So at the bottom, you'll see that there's a blue link. I know you won't have access to it on the recording, but we'll find a way to get this to you. This is a packet that contains quite a few community resources in the Flagstaff and Northern Arizona region. And it's not just about healthy relationships. It's also about housing, food, clothing, healthcare. So it's a quite expansive list, but this kind of encompasses community resources in our area. But specifically for teens, we like to point out this little purple box, which are two excellent supports that are anonymous. So Bloom 365 is an Arizona local organization, and teens can call or text if they have a question, if they're in a crisis, if they just need to connect with someone, they can call or text Bloom 365. We also have Love is Respect, which is kind of like Bloom 365, but on a national level. Love is Respect is always working on cultivating healthy teen relationships. And again, you can call or text them if you have a question, just need to connect. Maybe you're like, my friend's in this situation, I need help. Maybe you're like, I'm in this situation and I need help. And these are two really, really important organizations that we like to point out. So I know that was very, very quick. We are getting ready to wrap up, and Nicole is going to take us through our last two slides.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca. So yes, we are going to just gently wrap up here. We're so appreciative of everyone watching and engaging with us in this recording. So what we typically do when we wrap up sessions is we always kind of take this pause to just check in with ourselves. So certainly encouraging it after this presentation as well. So even just sitting with yourself and kind of checking in with how do you feel emotionally, physically, if something is coming up, just really kind of taking that present moment to really kind of, create some space for processing versus like, okay, we're going to the next thing. And you might have heard something that you're like, oh, I need a moment with this. And so encouraging that space And what I'm going to do is I am going to change this to the last slide just so you can have our contact information should any questions come up from this presentation, concerns or comments. You're more than welcome to reach out to us. One of the big things that as we really wrap up, and something that we share as we certainly close out safe dates when we're in schools or in the community, is that there's always hope. This can be such a challenging situation to either be in a harmful relationship or to have a loved one or cared someone you care for in a harmful relationship. And it can be, like Rebecca said, right, having to support your friend in their own decisions, right? Because we kind of talk about, like, I know for me, I want to protect my friends. I want to keep them safe. And it can be hard to be, in that space, but there is always hope. When we talk about these things, it's, we definitely want to share and really focus on those community resources of, like, you're not alone in this. We're here to support you, not only within our agency, but, across Flagstaff as well. So that is, one of the notes that we do when I, end on. And just also, we're so appreciative of this opportunity to pair up with NACA, and we're just so grateful to share this information. But that is all that we had. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Nicole. Really appreciate you guys being here to present this information. And this information is so important because sometimes we don't really understand, what's happening when we're actually experiencing these harmful, symptoms. And so I think, sitting down and being in this space and thinking about it, writing it down and just, processing it and thinking about it. And if you do need help, please reach out because, you're not alone and there's always someone there to help out. And there's always somebody that is willing to help you. So thank you so much again, Rebecca and Nicole. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Northland Family Help Center for allowing you all to come out here and also being a part of NACA and what we're presenting and sharing to the community. Really appreciate you guys. So again, I wish you all a good day and we'll see you again.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.